George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Malik Graves, Jacob Blake, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, unknown, unknown, unknown. As Sean mentioned earlier, profound rebellion against racism gripped the world this summer with the recording lynching of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. We entered a rebellion that will be labeled in history as the largest civil rights struggle in the United States. Black liberation was put front and center unapologetically. The demand was clear. In the words of Malcolm X, you can't have capitalism without racism. And this system, this capitalist, racist, murderous system has to go. Our party members were put on the front lines of this uprising, organizing 150,000 people in Philly, protesting in front of the White House, working in coalition and marching through every community in New York City, holding our ground in Portland, protecting community members and families in Colorado, and taking the streets in South Carolina. We were there. Our intergenerational, disciplined, Black-led, woman-led, queer-led, TGNC-led, poor, working class, socialist party was there. All this during a public health crisis that rampaged the Black community. At the same time, as we saw the police attacking protesters and continue to murder Black people, claiming official declaration of quote unquote anti-racism. Yet it was our comrades and community members that were being attacked. In fact, police and vigilante attacks against protesters is the normal. As we continue to see cars being rammed into protesters and protesters being shot at often. As poor and working class people, it is critical in this struggle for Black liberation to know who our enemies are, our real enemies. There was a push by elite institutions, individuals, politicians, and corporate brands to co-opt this movement. They were scrambling to offer symbolic sacrifices at the altar of racial justice in the hopes to stop the outcry and the outpouring of this rebellion. Unable to contain the rebellion, the corporate media and political establishment on both parties worked to change the narrative. The primary strategy was to focus on the outside agitators. With lightning speed, the liberal and conservative factions of the ruling class united around this talking point. The narrative of the good protester versus the bad protester was uplifted to divide the movement and the working class. It is not unusual in a revolutionary process that the masses of people will start with simple demands. In this case, justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all victims of racist police terror. Basic accountability. The same things that anyone else would immediately be arrested for, these cops should be arrested for. But without the demand being met, the class struggle itself dynamically grew rapidly. We see that with the recent grand jury decision of Breonna Taylor earlier this month. Following the announcement that the police officers were only being charged with wanton endangerment, a member of the grand jury spoke out about the lack of charges recommended to them during the case. This forced the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron to admit that he did not even attempt to convince the grand jury to indict the police officers who killed Breonna Taylor on murder charges or anything for that matter. I want to make it very clear. No officer has been charged for the murder of Breonna Taylor. She wasn't even a factor. This major break in the case is raising hopes that justice can still be won. We often look at the actions and decisions of these institutions to measure how far the movement has pushed the tide. And the appalling outcome of Breonna Taylor's case begs the question, what will it take for Black people to really receive justice in this country? At the state level, proceedings are further exposing an elaborate cover-up operation. The movement against police violence has been given new momentum that our so-called justice system could convict an officer for shots fired into a neighbor's wall, endangering lives of other people, failed to convict the same officer that shot and killed a Black woman in her own home while she slept. It makes the war against Black America extremely clear. Where does this war come from? This system has developed on the basis of theft of land, of its original inhabitants of North America and the unpaid labor of enslaved African peoples. Police and military power in North America was fundamentally premised on racism and brutal class oppression, putting down the triple threats of armed resistance from indigenous people, the rebellions of enslaved Africans, and the fight back of mainly immigrant working class people in urban growing centers. In fact, the first quote unquote modern police in the United States was created out of fear that the more informal methods employed before were not sufficient enough to prevent slave riots and revolts. Over time, special forces and agencies were developed to repress the fighting organizations of the working class and nationally oppressed communities. The capitalists carried out the greatest expansion of policing. The military and the prison system started in the 1960s and 70s as a weapon against growing challenges to the imperialist system from within and without. This included vast counterintelligence operations with the explicit objective to subvert and divide people's movements and kill or falsely imprison its leaders. The United States prison system currently holds nearly a quarter, nearly 25% of the world's prison population. Yet the United States is only 5% of the world's population. Within the United States, a disproportionate number of these prisoners are young, Black, Latinos, Latinas, and Native American folks. The capitalist class is waging a war against poor people. The United States has over 2.4 million people behind bars, an increase of over 500% in the past 30 years. The US military is one of the largest employers in the world. And even in quote unquote peacetime, the United States maintains more than 2 million active duty service members. From 1997 to 2007, the number of women in prisons has increased by 832% and continues to rise today. Black people represent the majority of the incarcerated population within the United States. In fact, 1 in 8 Black men will be incarcerated within their lifetime. Gloria La Riva and I started a limited bi-weekly series against mass incarceration to uplift just some of these cases of those on the inside and to encourage everyone to write to them. Mass incarceration and racist policing are a direct symptom of 400 years of brutal repression towards African descendant peoples in the United States. In our current presidential campaign, our 10-point program makes it clear. Reparation must be paid to African American and Native communities, period. End mass incarceration of oppressed and all working class people, and fully prosecute all acts of police brutality and violence. The Party for Socialism and Liberation stands for the overthrow and complete replacement of the core institutions of repression, namely the police, prison, military, and courts. They cannot be reformed into a neutral body. It wasn't functioned to do so. It must be abolished by means of a revolution. The oppression of Black people as a nation inside of the United States is a central pillar of early wealth. Black labor became fundamental and reserved Black people to the lowest wages, classifications, marked more frequently by unemployment than any other worker. The war on Black America through state forces ensured the stability through force and intimidation, and is specifically focused on putting down any challenges to their highly unequal oppressive social order. It ensures capitalism. Stopping the war on Black America means stopping the capitalist dynamics that ensures the oppression of Black people. It means the liberation from capitalism itself. Marginalized lives, Black lives, my life depends on it. Thank you.